Please note that this episode contains depictions of violence, trauma, and suicide some people may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Without Regret, the podcast. This podcast is for people who are looking for inspiration to overcome obstacles in life and want to see that it is possible to live your best life and become successful, whatever that means to you, regardless of your circumstances. Hear from me and my guests as we share our stories of perseverance. My name is Tamara, and I'm the host of Without Regret, the podcast. I would like to welcome back Amanda Blackwood. If you haven't listened to part 1 of her story, I highly recommend you go back and listen to the last episode before you listen to this one. I wanted to have Amanda back on because we ran short of time during our last recording and there was still so much more to cover, mostly surrounding her recovery, and she was gracious enough to agree. Recording in progress. Can you hear? Okay, you can hear me through this, hopefully.
Yes.
But you don't know. You can't tell.
I can't tell, but it seems like it's good quality. Good. So.
Okay, either way, that's all that matters then. Okay, thank you. Welcome back.
Thank you. This is such quick succession. This is exciting for me.
Yeah, good. Yay. Awesome. All right. So I've got you back on here because I had so many more questions that I thought about, that a lot of them I had already thought about, but we just literally ran out of time last time. So hopefully we won't run too long this time, but definitely wanted to do a follow-up and you know, get some more of these questions answered and kind of focus maybe a little bit more on the healing process and what you did to get where you are today. Like the work, like what was the work that you had to put in, you know?
Oh my gosh, there's so much work.
But first, I wanted to ask about your brother and what that relationship is like now.
I have not seen him or talked to him in many, many years. The last time I saw him, I guess I was 28, 29, something like that. It was a long time ago. I do know that he ended up leaving that state and moving to Texas. And at one point, the plan was that when my son's father passed away in 2020, my son was going to travel to Texas and go live with my brother. When my son's stepmother took away his car and said, "It's in your dad's name, you can't have it, I'm selling it," my entire family abandoned my son. They told him, "Oh, you can't go to Texas? You can't make it there on your own? Sorry." And I think at that point, my son started to understand that what they had done to me was very similar. It was a sense of abandonment out of their own sense of entitlement.
How old is your son?
He is 23. He and his wife just had their first baby last week.
Oh, congratulations. That's so exciting. My best friend, like forever and ever and ever, her daughter-in-law is pregnant. Yeah, so. My daughter doesn't have any biological children, but she has 3 stepchildren that I've never met. They live in Alabama.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a journey.
Yeah. Hopefully this summer I'll be able to get down there and visit, though. So, okay, enough about me. So I also wanted to ask, okay, so we asked about your son. That was the one I just wrote down right before. I did read your, or listen to a little bit of your book through Spotify. Just the ones that I didn't have to subscribe for, but I am going to subscribe. I'm not cheap. I'm going to subscribe. Because now I want to hear all of it. Yeah, I've heard like the beginning and the end. I missed everything in the middle. So good tactic, by the way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So some of my questions were somewhat answered by listening to that, but of course my listeners haven't listened to that. So, so how do you learn how do you get over those feelings of feeling guilty, feeling like this is all my fault? I think we touched on it a little bit last time, but I want to kind of dig into a little bit more about how do you get past that?
A lot of it had to do with the actual research into why this happened and why do people feel these things and why does this feeling exist. One of the things I learned in my research was that there was a poll done of high school students several years ago now. And in the poll, it asked, when is it appropriate, when is it okay for a boy to force himself on a girl, basically rape her? When is that okay? And the answer across the board should have been never. Right. But instead, there were very specific questions. Is it okay when he takes her out for an expensive dinner? It was something like 28% of boys said yes, and 14% of girls said yes. They said that that was an appropriate time for him to force himself. There were a bunch of questions like this, and towards the bottom of it, it said, if she's already been intimate with somebody else. 52% of boys said then that it's okay for them to force themselves on the girl. 47% of young women. When I read these statistics and I started looking a little bit more and started using my analytical brain, I realized that if these are the numbers that we're seeing across the board, no matter what our brains are telling us, our hearts are telling us something else. That it's partially our fault. If this happens to us, it's our fault. And there's this massive amount of guilt that's associated with it. And we all have these things where when something bad happens, either to us or to somebody we love, we feel this level of guilt. If a family member dies of cancer, we feel a level of guilt that we weren't there for them enough, even if we were there every single day. Understanding this about the way that human brains work, I started to also research compassion. And not just compassion for other people, but compassion for self. And when I started doing a lot more research and digging into that, I found myself starting to put this new thought process and this new framing into my own way of existing every day. If I made a mistake on something, I would sit back and go, it's okay. I can try it again. Or if one day I was walking up on stage and I'm not kidding you, I tripped, I stumbled, and then I looked at the audience and I laughed. You have to give yourself compassion and grace, and you have to understand that things do happen in life. And that guilt that we feel, that guilt is closely associated with a trauma response known as the need for control. We feel like we could have or should have controlled that situation. And what we have to understand is that we were completely out of control, and the people who did horrible things were the ones in control at the time. And it says far more about them than it will ever say about us. At that point, that's when you can start letting go of the guilt.
Gotcha. I think it's so much easier to give compassion to other people than ourselves. Way more difficult to give it to ourselves. I try to think of it as, what advice would I give my friend if they were in this situation? That's the advice I should be giving myself.
Right. I tell people all the time that if I talk to other people the way I used to talk to myself, I wouldn't want that person in my life.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I had to reframe that.
Yeah. Okay. How did you manage to get to a place where you could trust again and have a healthy relationship that you have now?
It's such a great question. One of the things that kind of surprises me even about myself is that even with everything that I went through, I never lost my ability to trust. I did lose my ability to trust completely, and I still struggle with that part of it. But there's always been a part of me that was hopeful for humanity. Now, not everybody is that evil person. While it was a police officer that trafficked me in Scotland, Before I ever went over to Scotland, I was friends with many police officers, and for a little while was engaged to a highway patrol officer out in California. He was one of the best men that I'd ever known in my life. I had to have that balance to where I was constantly thinking about it. That person is setting off red flags. I don't want to be around them, but that person is offering a safe place to stand next to them just so I feel safe. That person's okay.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I would imagine that there are a lot of people who have gone through similar things to what you've gone through that lose the trust. Right. In a way, I almost kind of feel like some amount of lack of trust is healthy. Maybe. Maybe you're a little too trusting. I don't know, or were. You know what I mean?
I definitely was for a long time.
Yeah.
And that goes back to having healthy boundaries too. You can make friends with somebody and you can have this level of trust with them where you know that you can tell them certain things and they're not going to be blabbing it all over town. But you also want to make sure that what you're telling them isn't things that's going to force you down the road of having a codependent relationship or friendship with this person, to where this is the only person that you can talk to and you have to tell them everything because you feel like if you don't tell them absolutely every detail of your life, existing or past, then you're not having a proper functional relationship. My husband has read my autobiography. He knows all of that stuff. He does not know specifically what was done to me because nobody needs to know that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about that in our first recording too, that I loved how you did not go into a lot of detail on that. I think that's fabulous. Because one, especially after listening to your memoir, I know it's difficult. It's got to be difficult to talk about. So, and that's not the point. Right. That's not the point. The point is really bad things happened. You have overcome it at this point, and you are healing and you are helping other people. And that's what's important. So I love that. Thank you.
Going into too much detail of a trauma like that is something I call trauma vomiting.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that. You said you did that, I think, with one of your therapists.
My therapist. Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to do that to somebody. It's harsh. Indeed.
We didn't have enough humor in the first recording either, but it was appropriate. So now I'm looking at, I really wanted to ask you a lot of the questions that you have on your one sheet. And the biggest one I wanted to ask and didn't last time was the myths about trafficking.
So there's so many. Oh my gosh. Let's start with the most prevalent. When you see a post on social media about some lady who says that she was followed through, I don't know, Walmart, by some guy that she thinks was creeping on her and followed out to her car, oh my gosh, this is human trafficking. No, that's not human trafficking. He might be a serial rapist. He might be a serial killer. You have higher odds of him being one of those two things than you have of him being a trafficker looking to snatch you off the streets. Most people who are trafficked by people they know and trust and love, people who have a sense of authority over their lives. If you think about my three examples where I was trafficked all three times, the first time when I was 18, it was by a boyfriend. The second time, it was by a young couple that had taken me in and had a sense of authority over me and sold me to somebody else. And the third time was a man I had known for 7 years who was a police officer in another country. And I was engaged to be married to him. He hit all of those marks for being a person that was supposedly in a trustworthy position, a position of authority, and I couldn't go to authorities because of this. Most people are trafficked by parents, aunts and uncles, grandparents, boyfriends, girlfriends. They're trafficked by people they're already familiar with. Even friends at school have been known to be trafficking other kids, their friends. Now, the snatch and grab situations, that makes up probably 10 to 15% of all cases.
Right.
That's one of the biggest.
That is a huge one because it's exactly what I thought.
Yeah.
Like when we talked last time, I was completely taken aback by the fact that that's really a very small percentage of how
Right.
it happens, which is unfortunate because that's what we're looking out for.
Right,
We're not
exactly.
looking out for the parents. I mean, the parents, I don't even know how you could look out for that, but the uncles or the potential suitors
Right.
or friends at school. We're not looking out for that.
How do you keep your eyes peeled for Molly and Mommy? You know, how
Yeah.
can you predict that Danielle is being trafficked by Daddy?
Right.
You know, it's ridiculously insane, but the same markers that you would look for in an abused child with domestic violence are the same markers that you would look for in a child that's being trafficked. But children in trafficking is another big myth.
Okay.
Everybody thinks that it only happens to people under the age of 18, whereas people under the age of 18 only make up 1/4 of all victims worldwide. That means the majority of people being trafficked are over the age of 18 and are adults being forced into this world. The youngest person in recent years to be rescued here in the state of Colorado was 3 months old. The oldest was in her 70s. The average age of kids in trafficking, when you are talking about people under the age of 18, is between 12 and 14 for girls and 10 and 12 for boys. And it's a 60-40 split between them.
That was going to be my next question. So 60% girls, 40% boys.
And of course, these numbers are all estimated too, because it's hard
because you
to
don't really
track it
know.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like they have tracking tags on people.
Right. Yeah. Thank God. Not yet, anyway.
Another one of the big myths that I run into frequently is the crossover between human smuggling and human trafficking, and the crossover between human trafficking and prostitution. One does not equal the other.
Right.
So when you break down the definition of human trafficking, I know we talked about it last time, it's the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain sex acts or labor. There's no mention of transportation. When you transport somebody across international borders or state borders, most of the time, this is with the person's consent, and oftentimes with them paying money to go.
Right.
Now, once somebody is brought across a border, they can be forced into labor or sex or any number of forms of human trafficking to pay off a debt bondage. That is considered human trafficking. So there is some overlap there. And with prostitution, there is a very small percentage of people that go into prostitution on purpose because they think that this is what they're supposed to do with their life. Of that small percent, it's probably about 5% of all victims. Those people are independent sex workers. They're there because they want to make that kind of money.
Yeah. Or they need money for drugs, and that's the only way to get it.
Right. And that's very common also.
Yeah. But that's not trafficking.
Right.
Because it's still voluntary.
Right. But so many people that are doing sex work, and it looks like they're there by choice because they have a drug habit. A lot of those drug habits are forced upon them and kind of fed to them by their traffickers. I've seen it time and time and time again. But not all human trafficking looks like prostitution either. If you think about my 3 different examples, I was raped and molested. I didn't want to be there. I wasn't a person that was a party to this group activity that was happening. It was happening. I didn't want to be there, but I didn't have a say in it.
Right.
A prostitute, while a lot of times they don't have a say in it and they really don't want to be there, they are participants in the moment. So there is that overlap too, and it's very minor margins on either side there.
And I can see where it can cause a lot of confusion.
Right.
Yeah. But none of it's good. Right?
Exactly.
None of it's good, but
yeah. And they're all independent issues that all need to be addressed. They all have specific laws written about them, at least here in the United States. And one of the other myths about human trafficking is that it's outlawed. It's not. Not in every country. It's not legal here in the US, and it's not legal in, I believe, 147 countries total. But there's more countries than that in the world, and they do not have laws specifically against human trafficking in any way.
So is it more prevalent in those countries? Or does it just not really matter? It's just catch me if you can. I mean, it's really unfortunate because the people that trafficked you, not a single one of them has been held accountable for that. And that pisses me off. It really pisses me off.
It's also a really small percentage where that happens too. Of the thousands of cases that go before judges every year, very, very few, like 2% of the traffickers actually get held accountable for what they've done.
Sucks.
And the penalties for doing what they've done are so minor that they're going to be out in a few years and doing it again.
Yeah.
Another big myth, one of the ones that definitely bothers me the most, is when somebody goes out and purchases sex from somebody who's being trafficked. If that person is caught, let's say in a sting operation, you see these sting operations all the time on the news. 127 or 85 people were arrested today in a human trafficking sting operation. You have to question those numbers. Not only are those guys going to be getting off with basically a slap on the wrist because the fine for this is about the same as driving over the limit line at a red light, but the other part of these numbers is that they're arresting the victims. They are arresting people who are being trafficked, and they're charging them with prostitution, and they're ending up with these massive rap sheets on them that will chase them for the rest of their life. And even when they get out of trafficking, they're going to have an arrest record. They're going to have a criminal record to follow them around forever for doing nothing but trying to survive when somebody else is doing the criminal activity and forcing them into it.
I think there's a case right now, and I'm sure you're very much aware of it, a young girl who is in jail for prostitution and murder. I think she ended up killing her trafficker, which again was somebody she knew, was not just some stranger abduction, and she's in jail for it. And I know they're trying to fight really hard to get her out, and it's been difficult, which sucks.
There's petitions and stuff that people can sign, but unless we do more than just sign a petition for her benefit, unless we go in and actually change the laws, nothing about this is going to change. We have to get together. We've got to reform these laws. We need to petition in legislature.
What's crazy to me is, because I can understand how it would be difficult to know if this is prostitution or trafficking, but you said they're advertising it as a trafficking ring.
Right.
So these women, doesn't that just automatically like make them the victim in something? Like, how can that just doesn't make sense.
The reason it's being written up in newspapers as being a human trafficking raid is because human trafficking has become a buzzword.
Gotcha. So it's not the police saying it, it's the newspapers. And the media never gets it right.
Right. Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
And they report on these incidences specifically because they are inflammatory.
Yeah.
It's going to sell more newspapers than my story.
Yeah.
I'm one person that was being trafficked by one person, which is far more common.
Right. Yeah. Totally get it. So that brings up the next question then. How do you get involved? How did I know how you got involved? But how would someone like me get involved? And what can we do? What's the best way for us to help?
Get involved with different organizations in the area, or find somebody that you know is going to be a reputable organization that you can help out with online. There are organizations out there. There's one in Colorado Springs called Compass 31. It was founded in 2011 by a young lady by the name of Jenny Sue. She's a survivor herself. She's incredible. She's doing amazing works in the world. There's many organizations here in Colorado that will have homes where they can house survivors of human trafficking. There's a light that offers the legal services for people to be paired up with lawyers when they need them most. Just make sure you vet the organizations. If you're hesitant to give your money, give your time. Find out who they are from the inside. Get involved with their groups. When they have fundraisers, go out to the fundraisers. Really get to know who they are. Because if you can do that, if you can get involved with them, then you might feel a little bit more comfortable with who it is that you're giving your money to. But make sure that you have some way of learning who they are, where their money is going to.
So how do you know that it's a reputable play? What are the kinds of things, activities that they're doing to help that make you know that that's a reputable?
I do know that Covered here in Colorado, it's known as coveredcolorado.org, I believe. Covered has a safe house for survivors of trafficking. They do talk about some of the projects and stuff that they do with the survivors. And of course, to help protect the survivors, they do not put up images or photos or videos of the actual activities, but they do talk about and have different survivors give testimonies of the things that they've experienced and the changes that they've gone through because of these programs. Compass 31 is really good about that too. They actually have the Gold Seal Award for transparency. They're fantastic. They make sure that every dollar is accounted for and anybody can find out exactly where every dollar went.
Are there any organizations that are doing any lobbying or legislature type work?
There is a woman who does. Her name is Kelly Dorr, Dore. She's another survivor herself, and she does petition and lobby to change the laws here in Colorado and across the country. She is a force to be reckoned with. I think she has taken a step back temporarily to be with her family, but she probably has resources and stuff on her website to be able to get involved with other people that are still doing it too.
Okay. So the organizations are more focused on helping the survivors get back on their feet, get, help. Just saw some lightning. Some help, therapy and stuff like that, and the legal help.
Right.
So that's what they're focusing on.
Yeah. Covered was the organization that got me the therapy that I needed it when I needed it most.
Okay.
And I had an ally that I had met through Covered, and she was the one who was able to set me up with the services through Alight. Mm-hmm. So all these organizations, all these people, they're working together to try to make an impact. And it's fantastic that they can make an impact on one life at a time. But we really do need to get to the root of the problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they're just going to keep having more people to help. I mean, really, the goal would be to put themselves out of a job.
Right, exactly. That's exactly it. And there are some organizations out there, when you do any kind of research on them, some of them do show up as they'll have the same survivors for years in their program. And one of the things to look out for there is that can be for a number of reasons, but the two main reasons is this person is so repressed in their personal growth because they had been trafficked most of their life that they're still struggling to try and figure out how to have a normal life. Mm-hmm. Or this is somebody who is being exploited by the organization now. And this does happen, where the organization is receiving government funding to keep their operation going as long as they have a certain number of people coming through their door. Mm-hmm. And they need these survivors to depend on them. I've seen it so many times, and it's just heartbreaking.
That is heartbreaking. And that was one of your things, what organizations not to work with. Would you like to name a few or all?
There's one in particular that anybody who's familiar with human trafficking fights should probably be aware of, and that is Operation Underground Railroad.
Okay.
The man who started this organization, I've met him, I've had conversations with him. At the time, I thought he was the best thing since sliced bread. His name is Tim Ballard. He was a former U.S. Navy SEAL, and he now lives in a multi-million-dollar mansion down in San Diego, which the Navy, I guarantee, did not pay that kind of a wage. Mm-mm. He runs these... I'm trying to figure out how to put it nicely. Kind of SWAT operations in different countries where he will go down and work with the local government and extract usually children that are being, pretty much 100% children that are being exploited in different countries, and he'll pull them out of the trafficking situations. But nobody bothers to ask what happens to them afterward.
Mm-hmm.
The traffickers are then arrested, but these kids are usually dumped off in orphanages. And when he goes into interviews, he talks about his personal experiences in doing these operations. But in talking about his personal experiences, one of the things he does is he'll take the story of a trafficking victim. I can't call them a survivor yet, but he'll take the story of a trafficking victim and pass that story on, specifically trying to garner sympathy for his cause so that more people will donate money to his cause. And that's another form of exploitation. If you take the story of a survivor and you tell it for your own personal gains, that person's not getting any money out of it. You're exploiting them. You're using them.
Mm-hmm. Almost trafficking them again.
Yeah.
Definitely exactly. Re-victimizing.
Yep.
All right, Tim Ballard. Not a good guy.
Yep. And he's got a movie coming out about him. I'm going to boycott it.
Okay, I was going to say not a movie against him, but for him. Like it's his own movie.
It's all advertising Operation Underground Railroad. And
I want to say I've heard of it. Like of all these things you've mentioned, that's the only one that even rings a bell in my brain. Yeah. So he's good at his marketing.
Yeah. He's got a full marketing team doing all this for him. He's got professionals because he can afford it.
Yeah. Yeah, because he's taking our money and not using it to help
that's what
people.
Your money is going to.
Yeah.
Just kind of a weird aside. There's a bunch of car insurance companies out there you've never heard of that have like the cheapest rates out there, when places like Progressive and Allstate claim that they have the cheapest rates. The reason for that is because Progressive and Allstate have to pay for the radio advertisements and the TV advertisements and the commercials, and they have to have this massive budget, and the customer is the one paying for it. It's the same with these anti-trafficking groups. If they've got the name, if they've got notoriety, if you see them everywhere, that's what your money's going toward.
Right. My daughter did, I think it was a senior project or something, that they had to write I don't even remember what the project was, but basically she was bashing the breast cancer awareness, like pink campaigns, how, because of their marketing budget. And my counter argument to that, which is going to be my counter argument to you, I don't feel super passionately about this. It's just what came to my mind. The more money they spend on advertising, the more they can get the word out there, the more money they can raise. And if you look at it as a percentage of what they're raising, and I don't know what those numbers are, but if we say, okay, they're raising X amount of money and 1% of it goes into their marketing and the rest of it goes to do good works, and it's probably a much higher number than that goes to marketing, but in my life, 1% of the budget is usually marketing. So I'm sure it's more than that. But if they're able to raise millions of dollars because they spend millions of dollars in advertising, isn't that helpful? Because yes, they're spending a lot of money on advertising, but that allows them to raise so much more money than the people that aren't advertising. And I guess when it comes to cancer research, it's probably a little bit different than, helping survivors. It's a different sort of help. But that was my counter argument.
It depends on the type of advertising. Specifically for Operation Underground Railroad, what they're using is the stories of the victims. Mm-hmm. So their advertising budget is going to exploiting people.
Right. So, and the money obviously is going to support his lifestyle more than helping victims and pay for his travel to these countries to go bust these trafficking and get the children, which everybody, it's for the children, right? That's the big thing too. Yeah. Do it for the children. Mm-hmm. Yep. Totally feeding into the myths. Yeah. Yep. How does someone like that sleep at night? I don't understand. How do they look themselves in the mirror and sleep at night? I don't know.
There's a bunch of different shady practices with them too. If you look up Operation Underground Railroad and you use a couple of Google keywords like investigation, You can find all kinds of dirt where there's questions about where the money is going to, questions about taxes, all kinds of stuff that people have been raising their eyebrows about over the last couple of years. And I think this push for their movie to come out is kind of their push to try to redeem themselves in those eyes. But so few people are interested in hearing the bad news about them that they're so focused on the good stuff. They're just cheering him on and throwing more money at him.
Ugh. Terrible. What helped you heal?
Research, people, a sense of community, the anti-trafficking organizations, the therapy, all of this stuff. But the biggest part for me was the research. I mean, I was doing all of this work trying to understand what had happened and wanting to understand what trauma is and where it comes from and what it does to our brains. As I was doing all this research, I didn't realize I was doing all of this healing at the same time. I was figuring out that these trauma reactions were starting to rule my life and I needed to change that. So I was finding ways of counteracting that and reframing my thought process just because of the research. When I went through the therapy, the therapist helped me to get over a couple of roadblocks that I didn't even realize were there that were stopping me from healing, and it gave me somebody to talk to in a sense of community. When I first started talking about being a survivor of human trafficking, I did it so quietly. This was 2019, after I had just been made famous on a pornography website and people were finding me on social media, and it's like, hey, this is what happened to me. And I was really quiet and kind of shy about it. And with a little bit of time, all these other people started coming forward and telling me, I've had the same thing happen to me, and we're standing behind you, and you're a beacon of hope for us, and I can't tell the whole world that this happened to me, but this happened to me too. And all of these people kept on coming forward and going, yes, speak up for all of us. And all of a sudden I discovered that I had a lion in my lungs that was just roaring to get out, and learning to speak and finding that all of these people were they're not just judging me openly. They're not just saying, oh, look at her. They were saying, hey, look at you go. That community that just built up basically overnight was huge for my recovery.
That's fantastic. That is so huge. I mean, you said it, that's huge. Like, that's awesome. I'm not one for, no, I have not thankfully been through anything even remotely close to what you've been through, but I do have multiple sclerosis. And when I first was diagnosed, I was doing all the research and I was, wanting to join all the message groups and the forums and all the things. And eventually it got to a point where I was like, I don't know if group therapy is really my thing. That's because on those sites, it was so Debbie Downer. It was a pity party. Yeah, exactly. It was a total pity party. And I was like, that's not me. That's not me. And no, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you.
That's actually why I'm not part of survivors groups anymore. I didn't want to be a part of that. I have graduated beyond that. I am a healed person who now has this sense of community behind me because all these other healed trauma survivors are part of my life.
Yeah.
That's the big difference. It's not a pity party at that point. It's an empowerment party.
Yes. I love that. And I did go to one meeting where it was people with MS who were still working and still living their lives, and they were my age. They weren't older and they weren't in wheelchairs, and that was fun, but we only met the one time, and then there was like, no, unfortunately it didn't take off. So that was unfortunate, because that was fun. It was at like a brewery, and or like not a brewery, but I think that they do have it was a restaurant. They had a full bar or whatever, but it was more, just kind of casual and just like, hey, but I don't know. I guess I just got to a point where I felt like I didn't really need that. I am an eternal optimist. always have been. And I think it had to do with my mom and the self-esteem stuff and all that stuff, or maybe I was just born that way. I don't know. I feel like you are also an eternal optimist. You do have a positive attitude, and because even when you got out of Scotland and came back, and or even before you went to Scotland, maybe especially before, you were, and I know you said you were focusing on everything else so that you didn't have to focus on what happened to you, but you still managed to build a life.
Right.
And you still were seemingly happy, for lack of a better word. I can imagine.
Joy where I could.
Yeah. You have a knack maybe for seeing the bright side.
Yes.
Where I think a lot of people don't have that knack naturally. And
I don't think I had it naturally.
No? Okay. Elaborate.
I had to force myself to start reframing everything that I was thinking. I went through a depressive stage for the first, 23 years of my life. I was definitely a pessimist, and I didn't know that this was something that I could change.
Okay.
But just like reframing my thoughts and understanding the neural pathways in my brain, I retrained my brain to think differently about
intentionally.
Things. Yeah.
Okay. When did that take place? At what point in this process?
It started slowly happening in my 20s. It was after my son had already been born and he's now out of my life. I'm wandering around and feeling aimless and lost. I'd been kicked out of one house after another. I was living in South Central LA, and I woke up one morning to my alarm going off, and the alarm was a radio. And on the radio, there was a guest that was being interviewed, and the guest said something about every morning when you wake up, you can make the decision to either be happy that you're alive, or you can make the decision to be absolutely miserable. And which person would you rather be? Would you rather be happy, or would you rather be miserable? Because that is absolutely your choice. And I didn't understand exactly what he meant at that time. And I wish I knew who the speaker was, because I would absolutely write to him and say thank you, because that helped me to start reframing things. I am happy to be alive. I am still here in spite of everything that I've been through. And I make that choice every single morning when I wake up. I'm here. I'm happy.
What if you don't want to be here? What if you think, what if your mindset was, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be alive. I'm not happy that I'm alive. Because I'm sure there are a lot of people that go through that. And that's kind of one of, my focus is to help people understand that they do have that choice.
Right.
And it does not matter what you've gone through. I mean, yes, of course it matters. I don't want to downplay it. That's not what I'm trying to say. But
there's hope.
There's always hope. Exactly. There's always a way. Always a way.
And I went through that. When I was in Scotland, I tried to take my own life at the train. When I got back from Scotland, that first year back was the hardest year, I think, of my life. It was harder than when I was in Scotland because I felt like I was a broken person and this is all my life would ever be. Right. I didn't want to be here. Okay. So in those moments, the things that got me through were the little things. I made a list. These are the things I need to accomplish before I die. Nobody knew that this list existed but me. And nobody knew that at the end, when I marked off everything on this list, I planned on killing myself. I was saying my goodbyes. I drove to San Francisco to say goodbye to one of my dearest friends, and he never knew I was there to say a final goodbye to him. I drove away that day and drove down the coast back to LA. And on the way, it's like, you know what? There's still a couple more things on my list. I'm going to knock those out when I get back. And I already had it all planned out. I hadn't quite written my suicide note yet, but I had it rehearsed in my head. I knew what it was going to say. And I also knew that probably nobody was going to care. That was my mindset at the time.
Can I ask what types of things those were that you wanted to, just an example, not all of them, but like bucket list type things or like loose ends?
Bucket list.
Okay.
And some of them were loose ends. I needed to say goodbye to my dear friend in San Francisco. That was a
Yeah.
loose end.
Okay.
I couldn't leave without saying goodbye. And that was when I started to realize how serious I had gotten about taking my own life. But on the bucket list, there were things like I needed to write a book. Whether it ever got published or not, it didn't matter. I needed to write a book.
Okay.
I needed to have an impact on at least one life, a positive impact. I couldn't leave without having that kind of a positive mark. And what I started to realize is when I was knocking off some of these things on my bucket list, when I made a positive impact on somebody else's life, it made me feel better about myself.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, well, there's a couple of other things that I wanted to do, and I didn't think I'd be able to do these other things, so maybe I can do this stuff. And I started adding things to that bucket list. Just one or two things at a time. And eventually this there were only 5 items that I was going to do before I died. This 5-item bucket list became 30-something items. And in 1 year, I had done them all. And then I became a flight attendant.
And then you're like, maybe I can be here. I kind of think almost maybe there was something in the back of your mind going, maybe these things will make me feel like my life is worth something.
Just a slight rephrase, but you nailed it. Maybe my life was worth something. Okay. I was so determined to end my life that everything I thought or said to myself was in past tense.
Gotcha. But what ended up happening was present tense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And future oriented.
Right. It gave me this drive to continue. It's like, well, I've done all these things.
What else can I do?
Here. Yeah. I'd always wanted to go to the Pantages Theater in downtown LA, in Hollywood. And I wanted to see a play, a musical. I wanted to see it on stage. I'd never been. I went to the Pantages and saw Wicked. Ooh. It was incredible.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And then it was, I want to go and explore the Queen Mary, the big ship out in the Long Beach Harbor. I want to go there and do the ghost tour because I've always wanted to do that and I couldn't afford it. And now that I'm going to die, I don't have to save up money for rent anymore. So let's go do that. And I went and did that. And it's like, that was so cool. What a neat history lesson that was. It was one thing after another where it's like, it fed me. I was doing things that I'd always wanted to do because they were things that I loved or was curious about. And those things fed my soul and reminded me of the joys of being alive. And along that journey, that 35 list journey, I relearned how to live.
Mm-hmm. Unintentionally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, something came to my brain while you were talking, it went away. Oh, I remember. So during this time, this year-long process where your end goal was to end your life, I bet nobody had a clue. They probably didn't even know you were even remotely depressed, because that's always been like, you think about Robin Williams, like, what a shock. Twitch.
Yeah.
What a shock, right? Like, I mean, of course, we don't know them personally, but the people that did know them personally were also shocked. So,
right.
I recently went after the Twitch thing happened. I was like, what? Are you kidding me? Like, really? I reached out to all my friends and said, look, you guys, please know you can talk to me. If anything is going on in your lives, like you're even remotely thinking about this, please know I'm here and you can talk to me. And oh, by the way, I've attempted suicide multiple times. I have suicidal thoughts in the last 5 years. I haven't attempted anything, but I was like, this is how serious I am when I say you guys can talk to me, that I'm being vulnerable with you right now and letting you know that this happy exterior that you see all the time, that's, cheerful and happy, even I have dark moments and dark thoughts, and I want you guys to know that I'm here and you can talk to me if you have, because I would be devastated if somebody I know personally, is a dear friend of mine, took their own life and I had no idea that they were even like thinking that way.
I don't think I've ever told anybody this, but I remember my lowest point since moving out to Colorado was in 2017. And there was one night where I was having a personal pity party. And as somebody that I had just absolutely just fallen head over heels in love with, I knew he couldn't ever love me. He liked me as a friend. It was all we would ever be. But I was madly in love with him. And I started to think to myself, gosh, I'm already tearing up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Why can't anyone love me? My mother, my father, my entire family. I had been so abandoned by everybody. And the person that I knew for 7 years and was engaged to marry had done such horrible things to me. Why can't just one person on this planet love me? And that one friend that I was madly in love with, I reached out to him and I told him just in a text message, I'm having a really rough night tonight. And he knew me well enough to know that I wouldn't say something like that unless it was really bad. He immediately called me, not just on the phone, but on FaceTime. He wanted me on video. And it was so rare that he would ever make a phone call to call me that I immediately answered without noticing it was FaceTime. And he saw the tears just running down my face. And he told me, I don't care what you're doing. I don't care what time it is. Drop everything and come to my house right now. And he saved my life that night.
Did he know you were in love with him?
He did.
Okay.
And I understood starting at that moment that I wasn't in love with him.
Mm.
I loved him deeply because he was the one person on the planet who truly did love me,
you.
even though he said he couldn't.
He couldn't in that way. He did, but he couldn't in a romantic way.
Right. Right.
Yeah. But he did love you. Yeah.
Yeah. He turned out to be my dearest friend all the way up until he passed away in April of last year.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It was pancreatic cancer.
Oh, that's terrible.
His third occurrence. He lived for 6 years with pancreatic cancer.
Wow, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, that's one of the more difficult ones to overcome.
Yeah, he was a walking medical miracle. So when he first got his diagnosis, normally people have about 6 months to live after they get diagnosed. And they had an experimental surgery they were offering him, and he went for it, and it worked. And he lived 5 years without it, and then the cancer came back. They did a second time. The chances of survival just of the surgery itself was something like 10%. And he did it twice and walked afterward, was still alive afterward. And when it came back the third time, it had metastasized, and there was just nothing they could do to help. But he had 6 beautiful years, and I didn't meet him until after his first diagnosis. I think I think God knew I needed him.
Yeah. Yeah.
We were pretty
God
close.
works like that.
Yeah.
Totally.
I miss that guy.
I'm sorry. I didn't want to make you cry.
No, these are good tears. I
Okay.
haven't cried about him in a little while, so they're good tears.
Okay. What do you love about yourself that's not physical? Gee, I wonder where I got that question. It's a great one, though. I wish I came up with it on my own.
And it's the first time I've ever been asked that one, and now I understand what everybody else is going through. It's like, I don't know. Give me a minute.
Or are those questions you ask other people? You
Yeah,
said you're
those
happy to answer.
Yeah, I answer this at the end of every episode of my podcast.
Okay.
And people are always like, oh, give me a second. I like that question.
That's like my where does your strength question come from? People sometimes people have to really think about that.
Yeah. I think the one thing that I truly value above all other things within myself is my inquisitive mind, because without my wanting to know how things work and why the brain is the way it is, I don't think I would have gotten through what I did. Understanding the little pieces of psychology and about brain's neural pathways and all of this stuff is what helped me to not just trick him into sending me back home, but helped to launch me into the research that I've done to be able to not just heal myself, but now to be able to reach out and help other people to heal too.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining me again. This was fantastic. And I hope you have a lovely holiday weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. If you or someone you know is in emotional distress or having thoughts of suicide, please reach out to the Suicide Lifeline. Call or text 988 or visit 988lifeline.org. If you or someone you know is in need of help due to sex trafficking, please visit compass31.com. This has been a Without Regret production. For show notes and resources, visit withoutregretpodcast.com. Senior producer is Tamara Albrecht. Our theme song is by Michael Perduglio. Artwork is by Tamara Albrecht. Executive produced by Tamara Albrecht. You can follow us on Facebook at Without Regret Podcast.